Alright, now we'll record this to the cloud as well because I'm just a paranoid type.
Yep. Yeah, you can't record it too many times, that's for sure.
And I'm also very paranoid about losing stuff. Yes, I didn't break anything. Woo-hoo. Okay. And Bill, did you see the article today about what's the guy's name? Just a moment. Bill Mensch.
No.
Pop it into the chat. It's on the IEEE Spectrum web magazine website. There we go. I'd love to see the entire article, I might add, but that's just me.
I thought you were going to tell me bad news, like something happened to him or something.
This year, anything is possible. With Clive Sinclair passing away, that was kind of sad.
With who?
Clive Sinclair passed away today.
I did not know that.
Oh, sorry to deliver the news as such. Yeah, it was just published 2-3 hours ago, something like that.
Wow. So I'll be right back.
Awesomeness. Hey, Jeff, can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
There's nobody else on from the board online yet. Hey, Nika, can you field questions for Bill and Marjorie tonight, please?
What do you mean by field questions? Field, what do you mean field?
Well, if things slow down, if you can start asking a few questions.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just because my connectivity sucks.
Oh, yeah, I have no problem with that.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah.
So you guys, who was it that said they were going ahead with their, well, maybe it was last Wednesday. They were going ahead with their show. Maybe it was last week.
Me. I said we're going to do VCF Easts. We're going ahead.
Okay, so you guys are definitely still going live then. Awesome.
Yes, we're still doing a live show. Things are really good in New Jersey. Can't say much for the south of this country.
Not going there. Going there.
I'm just saying it's not, it's good in our area, and there, I know the VCF West, we had, that county had to wear masks, and then Midwest, they had to wear masks.
Activity again.
Well, hopefully your content will get back. So, but East, we tend to be there in, the policy is if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, but if you're not vaccinated, wear a mask. So,
To me. I'm good with that. And I'm just going to copy a link for Bill about Clive Sinclair passing away today.
I just found out one of my chickens died today.
oh,
Man,
Yeah, just now found out, just when I went upstairs.
I'm sorry for both of you.
Yeah, it doesn't compare with Clive, but I mean, it's a family pet, unfortunately.
It still sucks.
Yeah.
How many animals do you have right now, Bill?
A turkey, something like 8 or 9 ducks, 3 or 4 peafowl. Geez, lots of, and guinea fowl out the wazoo.
Nice. So you definitely have a bit of a farm going then. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Obvious. One of my best friends has a farm on the south shore of Lake Ontario. I keep wanting to visit.
So nice background there, Jeff.
thank you. I had to switch from the Taekwondo because that's what I usually teach via Zoom. So,
Bill's on. You should have the 128 background.
let me find that one.
I need to
Well, you'll notice I have a pet in my background.
Is it one of the ones you salvaged from the Commodore place?
No, this was given to me by somebody that had worked for Commodore. He just brought it in one day and said, here, let it take up your basement rather than mine. So Hey, Jeff, make me an offer of VCF. I'll bring it with me.
Okay, sounds good.
Maybe like a nameplate on it or something, might be the price. It's just donated by.
Auction it off. So yeah, I was just started watching your video. I'm processing. Well, the videos for VCF West are processed. I'm just reviewing them, and
Okay.
so I just started looking at the one with you and Margaret and Chris Evans. So I'm going to release that as soon as I finish watching it, just to make sure it's good. But Kay Savitz, he does the processing for us. He's always really good with that, so I don't see any problems with it. Just post it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll promote it once I get an address for it.
Yeah, it's going to be a big show. It's going to be a big show. A lot of people.
So hopefully Margaret knows this is at 7 o'clock. I thought it was at 8 o'clock till I got the invite. So the confusion was probably on my part, but normally she joins a few minutes early. So hopefully she's not out of sync by an hour.
Is she in the same time zone?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we're GMT -4 now, not -5.
And my connectivity just went to the toilet.
Yeah, we weren't going to say anything.
All right.
I'm lucky. I have FiOS here.
There we
So
go.
I get symmetrical bandwidth up and down.
Oh yeah, I love FiOS. I was so glad to be able to upgrade to faster speed. It's always been good for me.
What's your bandwidth like at VCF these days? It used to be almost non-existent. Is it?
Oh, well, that's a good question because we have a cable modem and it's through Optimum. I think Altice is the new name for the company. And what they're doing is they decided that they're going to start going to fiber optic. So they decided that anyone who has a cable modem is going to get downgraded in their speed.
So you're being rewarded for being an early adopter.
So the problem was that we were.
There's Margaret. Keep going.
So the problem is that we were like, we weren't like in residential. So since we weren't residential, no one was inclined from Verizon, which would be the fiber optic, to install something. So we were kind of like, now what do we do? We're going to get stuck with 5 megabits per second. So we were able to get somebody who knew the vice president to step in and make an exception for us.
Wow.
So we're going to get fiber optic, which is like, because I was getting really worried if I'm going to be streaming VCF East, I'm like, how am I going to do this with that little bandwidth?
Right.
I was getting really worried. Even for everyday stuff, it's going to be like nowadays with video and everything, it's just really hard. So,
right.
It like literally we're in the process of this week and next week trying to get it hooked up. So it's like going to be down to the wire, I think, to get fiber optics running.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Bill.
Long time no see.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks.
Yeah. We're so used to talking to each other once a week. Now we had to go through withdrawals. I still on Thursdays. I'm like, what am I forgetting today? And it'd
Right.
be like, it'd be
Yeah.
2:30 on a Thursday.
Yeah, every Thursday for like what?
Year and a quarter, something like that.
Yeah, it was quite a while.
But I just wanted to welcome you to TPUG's meeting. My connectivity kind of sucks. So I'm out for a good chunk of the meeting tonight. And I've asked a couple of other people to take over for me. So we'll do our best to record and upload and what have you. But I do want to thank you both for joining us this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You're welcome.
Oh, crap. Of course, now the recording stopped.
It stopped and then it said it started again.
Oh.
Of course, that doesn't mean anything. I don't trust computers, so, you know.
That's always a good plan.
Well, when Jeff had the C64 background up, that was how we didn't work on the 128 functionality till the 64 functionality was really, really good. So I had to fight that stupid 32911 number that it shows would be like 8,112. It's like, oh, not even close, because it was how good the memory test ran. So we get the board layout better and we get the design better, and it slowly crawled up to the number it was supposed to be. And you knew if something went wrong, that stupid number would change again, and it's like, ah. So that was a live number that says in the bytes free, like they're on the 128. That's an absolute live number. If you have a shorted address line or something, if it still boots, it'll give you a different number of bytes free. So that was our first, that, and I had a radio on in the lab, and I would listen to the interference on an AM radio. Would sit there and go, and I could hear the memory test going, and stuff like that from the FCC transmission.
Oh my God. Is that kind of like how they have Altaires and they play music through it onto the radio?
Oh yeah. You absolutely. So if I go ahead and launch into a story, Margaret knows this about me. I'm full of stories.
Endless.
Yeah.
And they're all good.
Well, that's debatable. But they would play a song on the recording heads of 1541. They would slam it against the stop and play like Anchors Away, and you'd hear like, and you just know you're just tearing the heck out of the alignment of the disk drive. But so no, we had singing disk drives.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I did see that someone did it in a YouTube video with drives or printers, I think, actually too. Drives
with line printers, yeah.
Yes. And maybe scanners or something like that. So
yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Anyhow,
really?
what are we gonna? What's the format you guys are gonna do for the Zoom here?
I know there was a bunch of people who had questions that they wanted to bring up. I'm happy listening to stories myself, but I didn't really have anything planned to exactly any sort of format planned.
Okay. So
I got a quick question then.
Go nuts.
Yeah, go for it.
Question for Bill. You were talking about the memory on the 64 128. Was there ever any plans or hacks thought of to extend the 128 to the 64 side?
Absolutely not. It was in fact, we had that until the last rev of the MMU, but Freddie Bowen, I asked him, I said, I've been asked to do a C64 plus mode, and his words were absolutely not. He said, we will not be screwing with the definition of what a C64 is. And I totally agreed. I mean, Fred was that way. He was like our conscience. And the moment he spoke, I'd find myself in total agreement with him. And so we were not going to reward the C64 crowd by screwing up the definition of a C64. Now, in hindsight, do I wish I'd left a jumper we could have thrown? Maybe, but at the time, I was definitely not going to. And I had people tell me, oh, if I was you, I would have found a way to do it. And they didn't realize that it had been that way throughout the development, and we removed it at the last minute. It's like pulling the pin out. So no, and there was nothing that would use it natively, and if anything else, getting something to be C64 compatible was really, really hard. And if you've read the book, just even moving the dot on the I would screw up the compatibility. So, that would have been risky to do anything like include a special mode. Just having that register in there, like the 2 meg register, I got burnt by that. I left the 2 meg register in thinking nobody will write to this place you're not supposed to. And basically within a month of releasing the 128, Escape from Fractalis and I saw the code. It was buggy. They meant to go down and they went up and around and wrote it twice. So it was a bug, but they're allowed to do it. It's their computer, right? So I even got burnt by trying to leave the 2 meg function in there. And the reason I left it in there is I didn't trust the VIC chip to reset correctly. I was afraid that if you did a reset, 2 meg mode would go away and never come back. So that's why we made the one exception is we didn't want to lose the mode in 128 mode. So long answer, but yeah, no, we respected the C64.
That's awesome. Thanks for that answer.
So,
So yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So, I finished reading your book and I had read it on the plane to and from West and then Midwest. And I was just wondering, how did Margaret, did you, it's obviously you said you were talking to him on a weekly basis with the book, and did you record your conversations with him and then sort of make it a transcript out of that? What was the process for
that? I would
Yeah.
expand that to Margaret to just say, if you could describe the whole process, because Margaret was really the brains of the outfit and she put together the whole process by which we were able to take my, as I say, my ramblings of a madman and turn them into the scribblings of a madman.
So what we did, we used a Google Drive for our platform, let's say. And we actually tried out a few different methods. At first, what we did was we recorded our conversation on the Google Drive. And then, so that would be transposed into typing, and we saved that. And then after our meeting, I would work on that. I'd go through that and, pull out what I could. That turned out to be kind of cumbersome.
Yep.
And when it transcribes, it doesn't put any punctuation in, and it runs everything together. So it became kind of a mess doing that. So we changed. And Bill had already written some stories or had narrated some stories, but what we morphed into was he would, before our next meeting, he would narrate, and it would go, I don't know what kind of transcriber you had, but he would talk into his
The Google Drive directly. I
That was
just
it.
used the voice of Google Drive.
So I would have text files. Now, when we would meet, we had the Google Drive up and we would open up the file that we were working on, the story that we were working on, or as it turned out, we would go chapter by chapter. So we'd be working on chapter 1 for the various stories that we were going to put in there. And we both were able to see the text. And so as we went through things, I would have questions. So we'd be able to talk. We had Zoom up in one window and we had the Google Drive in another window. So with the Zoom drive, I was able to talk with Bill and we could converse about what we were seeing written on the Google side of things. So it actually worked out pretty well. And by the time we got towards, let's say, like the second half of the book, we had our methodology down pretty good.
Yeah.
Because what we'd be able to do is, as we discussed the text that was up on the screen, and Bill was answering questions that I had about things to clarify things, sometimes he'd be, if it was something that he needed to input himself, he could actually type right onto the screen into the text and put that in, which was very good. And also, as he went along, he would put comments on the side of things, right. And he'd say, well, this has got to be this way. That's not quite right. We should move this over to there, things like that as we went through each chapter. And then after our meetings, we actually worked on the book probably every day on our own. And I would log in and I'd be able to see what he had done. And then he could log in and see what I had done. Sometimes we actually were in there at the same time. And then we would try not to step on each other's toes.
Right. So,
start editing one little thing and someone else.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So I started by typing the initial stories. And so Margaret and I knew each other from her book, the C128 Vintage. What's the full title of the book? Yeah, show us the book.
It's the Vintage Commodore 128 Personal Computer Handbook.
Right.
Survival, 2019 Survival Edition.
And she had asked me to write the forward for her. I forget how we met, that you asked me that, but we exchanged emails or something.
When I was updating my book, for those of you who don't know about it, I had written it back in 1985 and it got shelved. So when I was updating it to publish it in 2019, it was back in 2018 early, where I had some technical questions. I wanted to clarify some things. I found out that I didn't know Bill until I actually went looking for him. And I got his email address, emailed him and asked him some questions. And he clarified things for me. And I put that actually in the book, where he gave me important information that I needed for actually clarifying and updating things. But as a result of that, we kind of kept in touch a little bit. But later on in 2019, when he had been thinking of doing his own book, he contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in working on the book with him. So it was kind of nice the way it worked out. You know, we met early in 2018. By the end of 2019, we were working on Bill's book. It was really nice.
How long did it take to write the book?
It took us about, I'd say it was what, a year and
a half, easy.
Year and a half. We started in
By the time everything.
Yeah, I think it was December 2019 when we actually started gathering the materials and generally working about, how we were going to approach things. And then we really dug in that spring of 2020, and we finished it the end of July, or in July of 2021.
Right. So many, I had started by hand typing, and I could only do so much. Many of you know I have an injured hand, and I could only type so much before it would swell and get sore and stuff. So at some point I switched. You hear Margaret say I narrated. I would go into the Google Drive and hit voice translation or something. There's a button in there. And so we both learned to live with it. I learned to imply some punctuation and correct as I went. That was a big thing I had to learn to do. And then she had to learn to look, to recognize transcription errors in the thing, or to just know I got to ask him what the heck he meant here. It's just
and there were a lot of funny things.
There
were a lot of funny things. Like there was one part where Bill's talking about putting the sweatbands on his wrists for when he would be doing his initial design, and the way that it transcribed was sweatpants. And so, I'm trying to envision this. I'm there. Okay, so he put sweatpants around his wrists, and so when we met that next time, I'm there. Do you put sweatpants on your wrists?
And I had no idea what she's talking about, of course. And it's like, what?
So we had things like that we had to address. Some of them were really funny.
Right.
So
go ahead.
What I like about the book is that you often will tell stories at different times when I see you at VCF East or otherwise, and it's all like in one book, and more stories than I've heard before. That's one of the things that I like about it, is it's all in one place, and sort of you thought it out a little bit more and expanded upon it. Are there any stories that you didn't include?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So Margaret and I decided early on this was going to be G-rated. So that was the first and foremost, was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll were not part of it. The second part was that we were only going to mention people by name that had given us permission to mention them by name. And then the third part is we weren't going to actively try and disparage anybody that could sue us or get upset with us, right down to the point where we took out the story about Micron RAM. Well, we left this DRAM story in there, but we took out the word Micron, so that it's been sanitized to protect the guilty. It's quite is a way to think of it.
Yeah, we didn't want to offend anybody.
We didn't.
But we wanted to get the stories out there. So,
Yeah.
and Bill contacted many of his colleagues. I mean, we had a list of,
3 or 4. Yeah.
what did we have? I don't know, 48 people, 50 people, well, a lot of people who you mentioned. And so we made a list of everybody, and then he tried to
I
contact.
thought it was 70. I thought you
Was
said
it
it was in
70?
the 70s. Yeah.
I can't remember what number. It was a huge number.
Yeah.
And then the photographs also, we made sure that we had permission from every photographer. Every picture that's in there, we contacted the people and said, is it okay if we put your picture in the book? And everybody was very positive about that.
Yeah. Yep.
Very supportive.
So there was one story that stood out to me that I rewrote. And it was about when I met Irving Gould, and I had been drinking, and I had a full head full of steam and everything. And I wrote the story, and if you read it, you'd be like, oh my God, he should have fired you on the spot. And so Margaret and I talked. I said, I can, without changing any of the truths, I can rewrite that. And so I did. And, I may have mentioned I had a beverage or something, but I completely changed the whole point of it, and it still worked. So we did repurpose some stories to not be the street version stories that you've heard. So Jeff, my goal when I speak at VCF this year is I'm just going to hold up the book and ask if there's any questions. I mean, because you really do. You have most of the stories that aren't inflammatory.
Yeah. There was one I don't think was in the book, but that you had talked about before, was about the speed bumps in the parking lot.
That's Dave Haney's story. That I don't know about the speed bumps.
Okay.
That or one of those guys. That's from Bill Bagnall's book.
Okay.
And it's after my time.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. No, one of the guys, Frank Hughes, who's in the book, he used to try and drive. My version of the speed bump story is he used to go flying by the security shack so close he was trying to suck them out of the shack with the backdraft off his car. He'd go woof, right by it, and they'd have to call up and say, Frank tried to kill us again, type thing. But so there's other stories, like the time one of the animals passed out in the flower bed in the parking lot, but I won't tell that here. It's you could look out the window though, and at some point he rolled over and his arm or his leg sticking out of the flower bed. We had to run down there and put him back in the flower bed. So that was after one of our famous Friday drinking contests.
I think there's a question here. Micron wasn't the infamous MT RAMs that are notorious for failing?
Yeah, so I can go ahead and say it here and take the full legal ramification upon myself. It's not a book after all, but we had a high failure rate of DRAMs in this Commodore 64, and we found that production was doing things to the circuit board to make it pass the test, but it didn't make the computer work better. It just made it act like it worked better, so it would pass the test. And so I finally got involved, and I was, for all practical purposes, I was the C64 guy for a year and a half, after all the real guys had left that were on it. And one of the things we found was, it was usually Micron DRAMs that failed. So, it's the vendor. But then we noticed that it's the one at the very end would fail the most often. Oh, that sounds like PC board layout and propagation of signals. And so the answer with the problem with the Micron DRAMs was, it was both of us. We were both sinning, and it would turn up in real bad failure modes. A typical Commodore 64 of the day only ran for about 20 minutes before it would reboot. That's how bad the DRAM cycles were in that. So yeah. So yes, that's the Micron DRAM we're talking about.
Someone else said something about you're referring to the 4164s in the bread bin 64s.
What's a bread bin 64?
That's just like the original Commodore 64 design, not the C64C.
Oh, so the regular one, not okay. You don't mean a prototype thing or something.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Because they're, breadboard, I hear bread bin and I think breadboard, and breadboard's a prototyping technique. So I'm sorry, what was the question about the bread bin?
So he says, I guess he was referring to the 4164s as being failures.
Yeah, they were the heart of the system, and they were the hardest thing to work. And the real problem was the VIC chip did its best to set up the control signals called RAS and CAS. The problem was that the master oscillator for the VIC chip, you only know the rising edges. You know them perfectly, but we needed a signal somewhere in the middle to fall, and we didn't know that it would wiggle. So we didn't have enough clock edges. We didn't have a high enough clock frequency going into the VIC chip. So as the VIC chip went through various revisions or got warm, they would warm up and these signals would move on the oscilloscope. It would, start to fail in many cases. So it was just a bear. And this isn't in the book, but and we consciously left this out. I talked about in the original stories about our high failure rates and the fact that I don't want to say we didn't care, but if we got it under your tree in time for Christmas, we'd worry in January with replacing it with a working unit. So it was touch and go on the C64 for a while for that reason. Now, with that said, we're making millions of them. So, 0.1% failure is skitloads of broken units. So, when I talk about the problems we had, they were great problems to have because we're making millions of them as opposed to just a couple.
Yeah, that seemed to be something that I remember from Bill Gates, where they would beta test it in the field, like release the software before he really ironed out to a level where, there's not going to be problems.
If we did that, the serial bus wouldn't run so slow. But we would have missed a Christmas, right?
Yeah.
So that wasn't our culture. Our culture was we did what Jack Trammell said, and Jack wanted it now, or if not now, you would agree as to a time, and you'd better be done on that time.
Anybody else have any more questions? Otherwise, I will.
Otherwise, we're done.
I got one.
Go ahead.
I've got one, Bill. I
Okay.
was reading the book, and you were talking about when you visited Japan, and you told the delegation in Japanese that your boss would be dead soon. And then he asked you what he said about what you had said to them, and you told him. What was his reaction to that? I didn't really get a sense from the story in the book.
My boss didn't know what I'd said. The Japanese engineers laughed, and my boss asked, he said, "What'd you tell him, that the project was shit canned?" And I said something like that. So I didn't tell him what I had told, that he was the guy that got shit canned. It was the project is what he thought.
Fair enough.
And I had learned the expressions in the book, Shindai Masugu, die soon. So that's what I said. I said he'll soon be dead.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read that and I had a chuckle. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
One of Margaret's favorite stories is where I dumped my Japanese toy all in the intersection of Tokyo, and we're scrambling trying to pick it up.
Do you still have those toys? Was it Macross? Is that what it was?
I've got it upstairs. I do. I accidentally set it to where the sun could hit it part of the day, so it did what Commodore 64s do. It changed color on one side, but or not 64s, but the other Commodores. But no, I still have my Macross stuff. So I'd leave it to my son, but he doesn't know what to make of it,
Doesn't appreciate the retro games.
Oh, it was years ahead of Transformers. It just years before, and it was prior to the whole anime thing. So no, I saw that while watching TV. Because you get there and you'd be jet lagged, so you would literally watch TV from like 2 a.m. till 6 a.m. And of course, I spoke some Japanese, but you can't keep up with TV speed Japanese. So I sit there and just watch the blur of it. And here was a show I could understand without understanding the language, or only picking out some words as they spoke.
It reminds me of, I don't know where I saw about the Japanese Spider-Man, and that inspired a lot of this anime and subsequent styles of Japanese art in movies. I don't know if you've seen that before.
No, I hadn't seen the Spider-Man, but remember, this is Yeah, I had seen an animated Spider-Man, just not a Japanese one, but we did have the one in the 80s. We did have the cartoon Spider-Man with that theme song, Spider-Man, Spider-Man.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
a live action Spider-Man, and the guy did his own stunts climbing up like towers and things like that.
Sounds cool.
Anybody's else have any questions?
Well, I'd ask if anybody has a favorite story that they liked from it.
Yeah, what's everyone's favorite story?
I don't know. I kind of like the whole thing so far. I'm still reading it and I'm just enthralled. That whole period has a huge fascination to me. The whole idea of engineering a computer from the ground up, including, as an aside, the 70s when people were building their own computers from scratch is just hugely fascinating to me. It's kind of a lost art to me, it seems.
Yeah. We didn't have a formula like you do today. If you design a computer today, it's either a PC or a Mac, right? But we were in the time when you for better or for worse, we were making new architectures. Now, it was worse when that architecture didn't get adopted, or it was too radically different, or it wasn't supported. And I'm thinking of the +4 series. The +4 series wasn't supported by Commodore because Jack Tramiel had left. So why would we expect the users to support something that we had, fallen flat on its face at our level? And I didn't fully appreciate the +4 series, the TED series, till later, till I had matured a bit, and I realized, well, wait a minute, he was going after, the Clyde Sinclair. He was going after the business market, and he wanted a Sinclair killer. Which is a poor choice of words, given that I was just told that Irving Sinclair, Sir Irving, passed away today.
Yeah.
Could you not argue that CPM back in the day was a platform?
I'm sorry, what about CPM?
If you could argue that CPM was a platform.
Oh, it was way more of an operating system than DOS. DOS wasn't anything. And I've only recently, in the last couple of years, had people say, well, you should have put DOS in it, in 8086, which never, ever occurred for even a moment to take the competition's lame, poor, whatever the DOS machine was. We called it a collection. Margaret's laughing because she knows I'm trying real hard not to be colorful with my language. DOS that was just a bunch of file-based executables. It wasn't an operating system like CPM was, and it wasn't in my humble opinion. And then I was spoiled by, BASIC. We used BASIC as an operating system. Wow, you can do a lot more sitting there typing a BASIC than you can at DOS. What can you do at DOS? You can list the directory. You can do a little bit of math. Other than that, you need some executables to run, or it's not going to do anything. And the Commodore 64, the 128, the +4, you could tell them to move sprites and make sounds. And, with a simple keyboard command, let alone the fact you could put a 10 in front of it. And now it's memorizing your commands, let alone scroll up and change the 10 to a 20, and it's a screen editor. I mean, which is Fagans did that. And I fell in love with Commodore and the C64 during my interview there, when Benny Prudence scrolled up and hit carriage return. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I want to work here. I was so afraid I had blown my interviews. I didn't care up until I saw that. Then I'm like, oh no, now I've blown the interviews and I care about it. So,
how many Commodore 64s were sold altogether?
So in the Guinness Book of World Records, it's 27 million is what they state. Okay. There's been people analyzing the serial numbers lately, and there's huge blocks of numbers that nobody's ever found a serial number in those blocks, which statistically speaking means maybe they really didn't get produced in that. So I've been saying between 12 and 27 million. So That sounds like a huge variation, but it's still a huge number to begin with, right?
Yeah, in the museum, I always say between 18 and 30 million, like, that I've seen the different estimates. I mean, sometimes people try to go back to purchase orders if they can find some from Commodore and other stuff like that. But sometimes it's really hard to really nail down exactly.
Right.
And then you have to consider international. You have American and you also have international computers.
Well, and you have to count. We got so many sales from overseas that if you did not count the overseas, and the same with 128. Oh, and especially things like C16s and plus those kind of things. If you don't count Europe, you're just not counting the numbers that were out there. So the only thing I'll say about if there was only 12 million C64s made, then suddenly the 5 to 6 million Commodore 128s doesn't sound so small. It's like, wow, so we sold a third of what a 64 does, and it was the highest selling computer. So that's my way of finding a little bit of sunshine in an otherwise bleak statement, So
5 to 6 million is a huge number, really, considering the 128 came out and you were figuring it was only going to be there for
1 year.
1 year to just fill the gap. But it was in that year that the Amiga came out and, sucked up all the air. That's where the attention was shifting towards by the time we got to September of '85. And meanwhile, the C128 still sold what I consider to be a very large number for.
Well, it made the money that they used to make the Amiga. No matter how you count it, we made over $1 billion and a half of revenue off the 128, and that's 1980s billion. So it'd go a lot further. That's equivalent of 2 or 3 billion these years. So we kept the factory open with the 128 in hindsight. So now in the book, I do say it shouldn't have been the 128. It should have been the LCD machine. And I still believe that the LCD machine was revolutionary. I can't even remember which word I like to use, but the 128 was just a continuation, and the LCD machine was the next thing. And we had no idea that management would choose one or the other. We thought we would do both. And it was supposed to, and they were staggered in time. The 128 was supposed to burble first and then give the LCD time to catch up. And they nixed it. Marshall Smith nixed it.
I have a question someone has there. How long was the 128 sold for before it was discontinued?
I don't know. Margaret, do you know?
I think it was up until around '89.
So as much as 4 years.
And, it went over into Europe, and the 128D over in Europe sold quite a bit. But yeah, and we mentioned that in the book. I think we have that in our C128 family tree.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was '89.
I wouldn't be surprised if there were still units in the pipeline in the 90s or early 90s, to sell out of stock and stuff.
So do you know how many revisions there were for the 128? The book you had done the initial version and just one version.
There is that wire is on every board. That's not quite true. They did the black diesel, the metal C128D was somebody somewhere later came up with that. That is not me. That's not, I don't count. Maybe I count that in the 128 totals. I don't know. But the version we finished in January is the version that sold 5 million of. So that's why there's that wire. And if you read the book, I talk at depth about why that wire is on there. That's there from the first unit to the end unit, not counting the metal C128D.
But Bill, I don't know if you guys can see the screen in my background, but that's my Rev 6.
Yeah, so Margaret has some that were probably at the CES show. The version that sold is Rev 7, and she has actual Rev 6. She opened them, and I laughed because there was a handful of jumpers that I had to get rid of for Rev 7 and still pass FCC because we had already submitted to FCC. So you were allowed to have jumpers and stuff, but you couldn't be moving chips or adding chips and subtracting them. So I made all these jumpers disappear without anything moving on the board.
You know, what was funny was that I was supposed to take the picture of the RIP on the back side of the motherboard.
Oh, and it's not on the Rev 6.
So I ripped open my Rev 6 and I take it all apart and I turn it over and I'm there, where's the RIP? It's not
Right.
here. And
Right.
it didn't show up until Rev 7. So
Right. And
kinda funny.
then there's the story that goes with it that explains why, which we call the weekend of tears in the book, you know, just from when we had to work 3 days straight through.
Now, what do you think was the primary reason people bought the 128? Was it just because it was like 64 with a better keyboard, or
C64 compatibility was it was the newer, bigger, better. We probably got some dual cells. I'd say probably 10% of the people that had a 64 went and bought a 128. But why wouldn't you? If it's C64 compatible and the 64 is the best-selling computer in the world, why wouldn't you, you know, if you were going to buy something, you would buy a superset of it or a 64. And
You know,
go ahead.
just to insert something here, the 128 mode really did have quite a value to it. The way it turned out, there wasn't a huge amount of software, but the productivity pack, you know, the integrated software, word processor, spreadsheet database, those lent themselves, in addition to the 80 column mode, those lent themselves to small businesses picking
Yeah.
up an affordable computer that they could use. And, you know, things like a small law office. I know one personally where they had a 128 back at that time. They picked it up and that was their first computer that they were using in their office to handle things. And they used it for several years. So that was actually an introductory level computer for small businesses or businesses that were just kind of delving into using word processing, for example.
Which makes me feel good that we got it so it didn't reboot every 20 minutes like the C64 did. We were adamant that we weren't going to, we didn't have a single timing violation in the 128 when we were done. And we were adamant about that if we shipped it with even one timing violation, we'd be shipping something that's going to do less than it could. I don't want to say less than perfect because it's far from perfect, but it'd have a problem from the very moment it left the loading dock, you know, shipping dock. So the other, I've recently found that a lot of people appreciate CPM for Turbo Pascal. I've had a lot of people tell me they bought it and ran Turbo Pascal on it, and it would run faster Pascal than the computer at their college did. So one guy said, I was driving home at lunch every day to compile my programs and go running back to school, and everybody else is still compiling.
it was a better compiler? So
Yeah.
Someone has a question here. They want to know more about how BASIC version 7 was developed, and they have a follow-up. Did they take BASIC 2 and add to it, or was it a new build?
So I just saw somebody mention they didn't have a desk real estate for the 128. The one
Yeah.
thing I'll say is you're supposed to set your monitor on it. So it was supposed to take the room of the monitor, would anyways. And same with the D model. It was meant to fit under the monitor. So I'm sorry, what was your question again? It was
How was the BASIC version 7 developed?
So it was a rewrite. Terry just started from scratch. It played on what he had learned on the +4 series, on the TED series. We still had to put the Microsoft copyright notice, but there's no Microsoft code in that. But I mean, if there is, it's little ditties here and there. So Terry rewrote it as a programmer would want to use it. And that was the thing, when Margaret mentions that the 128 did have some function, we pictured it as a machine that game designers would want to design Commodore 64 games on. So you'd be in 128 mode, you'd have your 64 display, but meanwhile, you have your 80 column display for programming. So And I forgot the question again. My mind is so horrible. What?
So you think you answered.
Oh,
part
so
of it.
Terry in basic, yeah.
Version 7, yeah.
So where I was going with that is, so Terry added on his own accord the structured basic commands: loop while, loop until, do until. And this is in the book, he got his interview, his not his interview, his review. Thank you. And the boss says, you did not do what I told you to do, which was not to include it. And while it appears to have been the right thing to have done, nonetheless, you disobeyed me. Therefore, no raise for you. And he got like a 3% raise or something, which is actually a Dilbertism. If you look through the Dilbert comics, you'll find the 3% raise is the death knell of management. So yeah, he got in trouble for doing that. The guy that wrote BASIC for the Amiga wrote it in the course of a month. He was brilliant. He would sleep on his desk. He was a character. If he wasn't asleep on his desk, you'd find him out asleep in his car. He was the only guy that ever showed up that didn't have a resume, other than me forgetting to bring one. And so he wrote on a piece of paper, "I really want to work here." And they looked at his chops and they hired the guy. And I wish I could remember his name, but he wrote the Amiga BASIC in 30 days, and it was something to behold. So he wrote I'm pretty sure it was him that wrote the C compiler on that one too, but I can't be sure about that. So now Freddie Bowen did the monitor that's built into both the +4 and the Amiga. I love the monitor. Well, I used it every day. That was how me as an engineer interacted with it. Is I'd be at the 60 at the basic prompt. I can't even remember what's the command, a monitor. I can't even remember it, but yeah, I used to type it every day. You know,
that's on the 128. You type monitor.
Monitor, is that it? Yeah, I wonder if it's the same on the +4. Then it probably is, knowing those guys.
It is.
Oh, cool. So yeah, we got told that we we had invented the perfect machine for software piracy once Commodore England saw the ROM monitor, and I just sent back a 3-letter telex saying THX, you know, thanks.
Yeah, that was very useful to have the monitor built in rather than have to load a program like you had with the C64.
Yeah, way more powerful than a IBM, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Did Apple have a monitor? I don't think so. They're still around though, so I have to watch how much I complain about Apple.
I think they did, but I don't know as much about Apples as they do about Commodores. Sorry. So yeah, Apple II did have a monitor. I thought so. I thought the Apple I and Apple II had a monitor built in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those anyway.
Did they copy it from us, I wonder?
Well, I don't know. I think Steve Wozniak was a pretty good guy and pretty good programmer. So I don't think so. I wouldn't think so. You know, you never know with later versions, like, you know, the 2GS or something like that. It's, you know, I don't know.
Right.
I like the story about the using the ZX80 as store stops.
Oh, the Sinclairs.
Oh, the
yeah.
Sinclair. Oh, the Sinclair. Yes.
Yes. And of course, once marketing saw it, they all had to go out and get one, but I was the first. And then part of the story, yeah, there's one there. Part of the story then is when we added the Z80 to the 128, which we did overnight, we didn't have any Z80s. We didn't have any in stock. They were in the CPM cartridge. They were hard soldered in, but they were socketed in the Sinclairs. So my doorstop was the first to give up its life for the 128. And at one point we went around collecting marketing's doorstops, and I would just tear them open right there and take them out. So I came back and I literally had blood running down the back of my hand. I can still see it. I had cut myself when I tore it open. And somebody's like, "Why are you bleeding?" I'm like, "Oh, one fought back, you know." They're just, you know, it's just, of course, herd's bleeding. I mean, it's
I have another question. Someone said, what type of operating system was the Commodore LCD supposed to operate with?
You know,
Let's find one there. It's gonna
you
bring
mean this thing?
yes, that thing. Oh, there's a little arrow keys too.
It's got a it's basic. It's basic with built-in word processor and some other things. Steve Gray, who copied the EEPROM? I forgot. They came here and they copied the EEPROM. Is Steve still with us?
Yeah, that was
There you
Mike Naber.
That's him. That's him. Yeah, he stopped by and we pulled the EEPROMs out of the LCD machine and dropped it in. And so I'd like to think that the LCD emulators that are out there now are based on that work, because I know there are some LCD emulators, software emulators.
Can everybody see my T-shirt? What it says?
Micropros.
Micropros.
We love Micropros. We love DA. We loved going to their suites. They loved us. We would load up on beer. It was a good time.
Someone says, where do you buy the C128 shirt?
I had my son make that. I copied a C64 shirt and then just had him make it. And they screwed it up. We can't get him to do 5 colors in here, so it's got 2 yellow bands.
Oh.
But one's supposed to be orange, one's supposed to be yellow, and they never converted. So this is just one I had done for fun. Thought I'd throw it on tonight. I'm still to the point. Margaret will tell you this. I'd love to sell Commodore T-shirts off my website. I don't own the marketing rights to it, and I'm serious about things like that. Would I ever get in trouble for selling Commodore T-shirts? Probably not, but it's not my logo to use.
Yeah. That's why little guys may get away with it, but maybe just like doing simple things, but not on a large scale.
The current owner of the mark, gets involved, and I haven't heard many positive things about their involvement. They're not interested in supporting the community's love of the Commodore mark. Is kind of the way I do it. Somebody just said based on the Amiga community, I would say yes, Bill would get sued if he I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question.
Sure.
If you could have been at the helm of Commodore, what would you have done differently?
Not created an environment where Jack Trammell would have left.
Nice.
Margaret, did we include the story of Jack Trammell? I don't think we did, of why he left.
No, really, we didn't. We
didn't say why
you talked about the fact that, he was there at the 84 show.
Right.
And by the time you guys got back, he was gone.
Right. So the story behind why Jack Trammell left, and this is from Leonard Trammell, told me, and he's since given me permission that I can tell the story. Though it didn't occur to me to ask him permission to put it in the book. He was arguing with Irving Gould over Irving's use of the company as a piggy bank and as a source. So he flew the pet jet. He wrote things off to the company, whereas Jack Trammell, if I was in line behind him one day at the cafeteria and he had some guests with him, and Jack could have just walked right through the cafeteria line, but instead he reaches in his wallet and pays for the people to eat lunch. That was the big difference between him and Irving. And so that was their disagreement they had. And it came down to Jack believed, in a work ethic. And I think he held himself to that same ethic. It said, then I'm not going to work here. So, and that's when Commodore really started going to pot. The 128 was done during that vacuum that was created by Jack leaving, and there was no bosses to tell us what to do. So we made a computer. But by the time the Amiga came out and people said, was I sorry I left? And yes, I was sorry. Not long after I left, I was sorry I left. But then I realized later I wouldn't have survived. I'd have been fired because I could not have kept my mouth shut to this horrible middle man, not even the middle, the upper R&D management that was Commodore at the time. they couldn't get out of their own way. They told Greg Berlin, one of my stories is, Greg was doing a version of the PC and they're like, well, take half the memory out and make it run slower. So next year it'll run faster and have more memory. That's not what you do. You make this year go as fast and as powerful as you can. And next year you do that again. You go faster and even more powerful. You don't blow a foot off this year so that you can, so shoes are a better buy next year. That's,
Bill, Bill, you make that point in the book when you're talking about the monochrome mode for the 128, so that so people could use a monochrome monitor. And as you point out in the book, your boss wanted you to take out that capability so that the 128 the users would require
a Commodore monitor.
And the Commodore color monitor didn't come out until a lot later. So anyone who bought a 128 early would be sitting there saying, well, I can't do anything.
Right.
But
what my boss had asked me to do, there's vertical sync and horizontal sync in the video signal. And there were two standards where they're both positive or both negative. And his brilliant idea was to make one positive, one negative, which no monitor supported at the time. And later, and this is the only time I lied to my boss, and I lied by omission, and it still bothers me, but I still think I did the right thing. When he asked me if it was taken care of, I said it's taken care of. And by that, I meant I had left it alone. It's in its final. I also knew that he was getting fired pretty soon too. So I was running under some cover there.
But Bill, that was an excellent thing that you did. When I got the 128, I was able to use 128 mode. I had a Zenith green monitor.
Right.
And we at home, my husband and I, we just made a cable and we were able to hook that up, and I was able to use it in 80 column mode early on. It was great.
Same with us. We wouldn't have had a monitor in the lab, right? We used Taxon or one of those TACOM, something like that, TAX. But we used common off-the-shelf monitors ourselves to work on it.
There's one thing, just to go back a little bit to Jack Tramiel. In the book, Bill includes a very touching, the way I read it, a very touching tribute to Jack Tramiel. And he doesn't go specifically into, why, the events that happened at that CES that made Tramiel leave. But he talks about the values that Tramiel had, and those values that he had come up with him from his early days, from his early life. Everyone knows that he was over in Germany, during the
he was an Auschwitz survivor.
Yeah, right. So I mean, those strong held values that Tramiel had, Bill picked up on that, and that was something that you did a great job of honoring Tramiel's memory.
Good. I did not know I had so much in common with Jack Tramiel, other than I was dedicated to the guy. We all were. We didn't see him, we didn't talk to him, but the voice of Jack was ever in the room with you, and I suppose there's a couple people that would get away with saying, well, Jack said this, and maybe they weren't true. But when I met him at the C64 25th anniversary, I found out a couple more things. I had known he was an Auschwitz survivor, but I didn't know he'd been in the service. I had been in the service. And it turns out he was a typewriter repairman. Well, I was a teletypewriter repairman. And so it turns out we had stuff in common, me and the boss, right? And so at this anniversary, we end up talking kind of shoppish off to one. I thought I'd be nervous and I wouldn't be able to speak to him and stuff. And I just found that was easy to talk to the boss. We shared so much, not just in background, but I knew he had this. I knew what his work ethic was because we lived his work ethic. So yeah, I don't even know where he gets the rap he does, but he was a good boss to work for. You felt like you worked for a company with vision and means. I mean, who else could turn around and make a computer selling millions? And just make it look easy. It was a small group of us that were empowered to do that. So yeah, it was a sad day when Jack left. I'll say we didn't, none of the group I was in, a bunch of people went with him, but because I was already on the, because I was actually on the LCD at the time, I was now loyal to the company Jack had built, if that makes sense. So I never occurred to me but the story is in the book in Margaret, where I got a job offer from him. When I did, I went to the Atari booth and I missed the offer, but Sig Hartman threw his arm around my shoulder and he's like, Jack was serious about that offer. And I'm like, what, did I miss something here? And I had gotten a job offer.
Someone asked, have you ever been on the receiving end of a Jack attack?
I don't know that there's such a thing as a Jack attack. I think that's an urban myth. We talked about it in urban myth terms because we wanted one, right? But with Jack gone, the middle managers multiplied like sheep. And there were too many of them. The ecosystem couldn't support them. I mean, they were running out of things to urinate on. So it was horrible. And so we talked about the need for a Jack attack. And on our mind, a Jack attack was engineers are this high, managers are this high, and we needed an axe to come through the room at their height, and missing us. But there's other people that talk about Jack attacks and stuff, and that's on them. But I don't believe that there is such a thing personally. So somebody said Taxan for the monitor. Yes, Taxan. Yeah, somebody, thank you, whoever said they have none but respect for the Tramiels. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. I had a quick question about your experience or time or knowledge of the TED series of machines. I know a little bit about the story of how those kind of failed marketing-wise. And forgive me if you've discussed this in your book. I regretfully have not read it yet. But
you will. Yeah,
I will. Yes, you are absolutely right. I will. What do you think could have been done differently to make those machines, or maybe even just the initial prototype machine, much more successful than they ended up being?
So the thing about the TED family was that it's a family, and not only did it, and so his vision was not just the 116, but also the 264. The talking 364, we went and got the people from TI Speak and Spell. That's how committed we were to a talking interface. And then we had at least 2 printers, Margaret. I think we found the MPS 801 and then
the 803.
803.
And the DPS one.
Was that a daisy wheel one? Something like that. They were 2 different tile. And so there was this whole, and its own monitor, its own disk drive. The disk drive went faster, so we were trying to make up for the slow serial bus. So there's this whole family fleshed out. And once Jack left, the family went away. They all just died on the vine. I don't even know that we sold the monitor. We sold the +4 and we sold the C16. Oh, excuse me, are the 2 I know of. And the C16 was a sleeper. It was just a way to use up a bunch of TED chips, and it turned out to sell probably 600,000 to 800,000. I'm thinking. The
huge disappointment when I was learning about this from you, because I really only knew about the +4, was the 364.
Yeah, the talking one.
The talking TED, and everything that you went through in that story that you talk about at the CES, the 84 CES, the Kmart demo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so exciting, and everything that you did to get that contract with Kmart and get the computer done. And then they just turn around and they didn't produce it. It was sad.
Right. Plus it was a desk motif. And so I would challenge that Apple did not invent, obviously Park, invented the desktop, but we had a magic desk interface. That was supposed to be the thing you did with a TED, was to run this magic desktop, and then it talked on top of it. And so it'd say delete a file when you go to drag a file to the trash can and stuff. And of course, then later the Mac comes out and everybody goes, oh, what a novel idea. And we just had to go, yeah, we know.
Yeah, you had already done it, but nobody
We'd
knew
already
about
done it. We ours talked.
Yeah, I saw that demonstrated at Midwest this past weekend. It was
Oh, did you?
Yeah, yeah.
How did they do that? Who's got a was it a software emulator or what was it?
No, it was a real there was a real machine, but I think it was on Commodore 64, the Magic Desk and
Oh, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I have a Magic Voice cartridge around here. So there's on the 64, there was Magic Voice. I don't recall if there was a Magic Desk, but it would have been easy for those guys to do it. That was done by Commodore Texas. But and so the Magic came from Texas.
Yeah, and you talk about that in the book too, the whole text and division input into the TED series.
Right.
Yeah, and someone mentioned it's the DPS 1101.
Okay. 8-Bit Show and Tell did a video about the talking Magic Desk. Okay, cool.
Someone says if there was a plan to make a second Magic Desk, a Magic Desk 2.
I don't know what Magic Desk 1 was, so I don't know what Magic Desk 2 is. I don't know if they're asking for the Commodore 64 or what. So the shortest answer is I don't know. Yeah, the 64 they said. So I think if they were going to, they would have. So once Jack left, the Texas kind of dried up. Texas dissolved, was the feeling I got. So as a center for ingenuity, Commodore Texas went away. That was Commodore LCD machine. The concept of it came from Texas, and I had forgotten that till somebody found a memo. My handwriting or my type style, and Margaret knows what my type style is, but so I knew I typed it, but it was based on the work coming out of Commodore Texas, and I had forgotten that they initiated the idea, and they would have been behind, telling Jack to purchase Eagle Picture, the LCD company. When we did our LCD machine, we were the only American manufacturers of glass of LCD displays in America. Everything else was in Japan at the time.
Why is Apple more popular than Commodore if Commodore sold more machines?
They're still around.
Yeah.
They're still around and rewriting history, and they're allowed. They're to the victors. They get to edit the history books.
But there was one thing that Apple did very early on, and in the education market, they used to give computers to the schools.
Yeah,
so
we had a very poor school program. We had one person in charge of it,
and that really was another real sadness.
Yeah,
because the C64 and the C128 and the Plus4, they all were very good for schools. The Plus4 in particular, even though the built-in software, it got a bad rap being mediocre, but it was there, it was in there. And a lot of software early on had similar features to what you saw in the Plus4. The problem was the Plus4 didn't advance, which is what people were expecting.
Right.
But from a school viewpoint, a learning viewpoint, that would have been a great one.
Even art packages, if you weren't doing a game, the Plus4 had 121 colors. Nobody had 121 colors when that came out that I know of. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. The Commodore 64 had 16 colors. It had sprites, but sprites are for games. So we had the ability to do a drawing package well before other people were, where you could actually shade and do all of that in and whatnot. And it wasn't really until the Amiga came out that ball got pushed further then.
Someone asked.
I think Atari 8-bits had 126 all right, that's something I didn't know. That'd be interesting. Do you mean the Atari 800? Or if you mean the Jaguar came afterwards. That is Commodore people went to Atari, and that's when the Jaguar came out.
Someone says, did Commodore Canada give computers to schools?
I don't know, but I loved Commodore Canada. We liked those guys.
Well, I grew up in Toronto. I don't live there now, and I know many people on this call are still in Toronto, given that that's where the club is. But I have fond memories of my elementary school days, and there was always a Commodore 64 in the classroom. And I think ComSpec provided most of them in terms of sales, but I would often see the badge on some of the kits. I don't know if anyone else remembers that, but up until the 8th grade, before I was in high school, I do remember there was always a Commodore 64 in the classroom. So
Yeah, in my school, we were one of the first to have a PET in 79.
Oh, yeah.
So we had the 4032 back in the day. And then in high school, in the mid 80s, we had Commodore 64s, and ComSpec also had their own hardware where they had the, I think it was called the microshare, where everybody was able to share one floppy drive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it was pretty popular up here back in the day.
In the Toronto District School Board, almost every piece of technology had a ComSpec sticker on it.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, my mom's classroom back in Toronto back in the day had a Commodore 64, and I remember a lot of the classrooms back then had Commodore PETs and later VIC-20s and 64s for sure.
Yeah.
So then I guess it was the US where there was like apples in every school.
Yes,
Apples.
that was the thing. Apple's marketing department was very, very strong in the education market. And I know that there were C64s in schools because when I worked at one, I used to do a column about using computers in education. And I would get people who were using Commodores, teachers, and they would write into me and talk about their stories, how they were using them. So, the Commodores were in the schools, but Apple really had, they really pushed ahead in that market.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, I wonder if we were just selling so many that we just didn't care, because we complained about it. And in fact, I still remember the woman's name that was in charge of the Commodore of the school interface. Her name was Barbara Felden. And I remember it obviously because of Agent 99 off of Get Smart.
Right.
But that was it. One person was in charge of the entire school thing.
And another thing from the Canadian market, there was a huge amount of software that was produced that came out of Canada for the schools. And I still have a lot of that on my old discs it ended up in public domain. It all has in the startup screen, it's got the Canadian address there.
Margaret, I think I have most of them. I picked up a lot of them. They're specifically made for the schools.
Yeah, that was very good what they did.
Yeah, sorry, my microphone wasn't working. I guess I was trying to say, in my elementary school, we had Commodore PETs, the C16 actually. And in high school, we had a whole lab of Commodore PETs, and I think it was provided by Commodore. That's why I was the one who mentioned that Commodore Canada had provided a lot. So I'm surprised in the US they didn't.
Yeah.
So my dad was actually one of the system administrator people back in the 64 and Commodore PET days. And I recently found this. So this is like a course, right? That's been very like low budget, amateured, but yet bound. And it has it's a whole course on how to program. So I was asking my dad about that. And he was saying the big thing back in the day was that there was no course material. And a lot of teachers were really making it up themselves. And this is actually an example of this. If you Google this, Amazon says unknown binding, but is aware of its existence. So yeah, it was a different time back then in terms of education.
It was, I mean, that was back when you mimeographed things. I mean, there were no laser printers. If you wanted 10 copies of a manual, you printed 10 copies of a manual.
Yeah, but they were all purple and everything, that weird purpley text.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'd sit there and smell them and stuff.
Yeah. I remember that. Yep.
Yeah. So nowadays, so there was the culture is so different. you couldn't even make your own course material easily to make that book as thick as what you just showed. As an amateur, no, you needed somebody to print the book for you professionally, you know? You couldn't just run some 3-ring paper through a printer. So it looks like, yes, everybody's absolutely right. Atari did have an 8-bit 256 color. So I stand corrected. I did not know that. So maybe they had 256 colors, but we had 251. So they probably did too. They probably had 8 shades of black being black. So now with that said, I was saving my money for an Atari 400. When I got my job at Commodore, I couldn't afford an 800 on my engineer salary. So I was intent on being an Atari user, and then I got the job at Commodore, and they just give you a 64, and it's like, well, I'm not saving my money any longer for.
Hey, Bill, just a general question: how much were engineers paid back then?
I was making 17,000 when at my old job. I got to Commodore and I asked for 26,000, which my headhunter literally pooped his pants when he heard I did that. And I got 24,500. So I made $24,500 when I designed the 128 in the +4 series.
And that was back when? What year was it?
1983.
1983. Okay. Wow.
So what's a comparison? How much was like a house in that area or a car or something like that?
You know, use it like a 3-to-1, almost 4-to-1 ratio, I'm thinking.
Yeah, that would be good money. Yeah.
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 So I had no complaints. You know, I would have paid to work there. I swear to God.
How did the Commodore 64 games get so good so fast?
Good hardware, I think. The sprites.
Oh, yeah.
Sprites. If you watch an Atari games, you know, from the 2600 days, they had 2 players, 2 missiles. And then as soon as you needed more than 4 things moving around, you started seeing a multiplex. And they're doing this, right? And that's real distracting. We had, 16 of them? It was just wonderful hardware.
Yeah, plus you had the SID chip in there.
And the SID chip then. Just sound that like, it wasn't just bit bang sound. It was true sound with filters and VCOs. And
you know, what the guys did with the SID chip, with the games, it was just amazing.
Oh, someone did the calculation. 24,500 in 1984 was $67,000 today.
All right.
So that's about accurate, about almost three times.
And I was, you know, I didn't have college or anything. So like some of the guys that worked for me made more than I did, which we thought was funny. At no time did I ever resent that. I was just happy to work there. So but yeah, and I got an $8,000 bonus for doing the 128. The thing is, they didn't take out any tax on it.
Cool.
So to a young man that didn't know about taxes and stuff like that, I literally went I shouldn't even say this. Well, it was past the point of.
Yeah, it's been 7 years past.
It's been 7 years. Yeah, it took me a long time to get caught up on my taxes.
Oh boy, it sounds like some of these stars that have millions of dollars and don't pay taxes, and then they have to go.
Well, I had to buy a used car. Mine had rotted in the parking lot. This is actually in the book. I remember, you know, I parked my car in November. It got piled under with snow. And come not quite springtime, but maybe February or something, we go to move the car. I had to have it towed, and it left behind a little rusty pile of bolts and metal pieces and stuff. It was real sad looking. But I had gone and bought myself a new Datsun 280 ZX, an 83, I think, with the money I'd got it as a bonus.
So there was a lot of things that you weren't able to do, or that were problems because you didn't have all the information that you needed, or such. What would be, if you had one thing you had to change in the 128? What is the biggest thing that you would have changed to make it better?
Well, it was supposed to be expandable to 512 meg originally. And my boss nixed that idea and then got caught with his hand in the cookie jar on that. And that's where we came up with the REU, the where we use DMA. So I'd say the only real complaint I have is we should have made it the way we designed it to, originally to be expandable to 512. Given the 5 months we had, even if you said, well, what if you had a year or something? I don't know what else I'd have done. I really don't. The MMU in there isn't a full-blown memory management unit because it doesn't have a supervisor mode. I could say, oh, well, I wish I'd put a supervisor mode in so I could claim to have done the first consumer MMU, but it wouldn't have done anything for the end user. So it was no harm, no foul. So I don't know. I'd ask you guys, what would you have liked to have seen in a 128 or even a +4 that wasn't there? A CD player didn't exist.
CD
Wi-Fi.
Bill, you talk about the 8563, that the chip that you assumed.
Yeah,
had
I
the
assumed
subset, was a subset, and that right from the beginning, that was a problem that you kept having to address all throughout the 128.
But it came with the territory. I still don't regret. Once I decided to use it, I was committed to that. And so to this day, I don't think it was a mistake. I could have asked better questions in the beginning. I'd have saved myself a lot of grief. Oh, so I guess if I were to do one thing, I don't remember knowing that the 8563 Margaret's talking about, the 80com display. I don't remember knowing that had a graphics mode in it. And I would have known that the graphics mode would be real slow because you write to memory by writing through that chip a byte at a time. So if I were to sit there and try and say, oh, how would you supersize a 128 to this day? I'd find a way to make that memory directly mapped. So you could write to it as fast as you could write to the regular VIC memory and do all the fancy graphics. But we were just lucky to get the chip to work. It wasn't on my radar scope at all to make graphics mode work better. And later when they're complaining about the graphics mode, I'm like, well, at least there's a graphics mode to complain about. Yeah.
But the 128 is very remarkable in that you can have two monitors set up if you want. You've got your 40 column monitor and your 80 column monitor, and you can actually write software that will automatically
display in one while you're writing it on the other.
Yeah, and you can have a program that will just bounce from one mode to the other, which is really quite good. Back then, I think people were more concentrated on having it all in one monitor. But now that, we're used to having multiple monitors, it's kind of interesting to experiment with it, actually.
Right. Well, remember that it actually wasn't two monitors, it was a TV and a monitor. Even though we call them monitors, the 1701s, it really was targeting TV sets. And I try and tell people these days, we used to display it on a TV and they're like, what, you'd set it on top of the TV? No, we used a TV set. And nowadays, we have high definition TV, right? But back then it was that clunky old NTSC that we had. So this is something I got out of the MOS building when I went in there. This is an 8563 wafer. So and I know that because I stuck it under my microscope here. And right there in the corner, it says 8563. So the dang thing followed me into the afterlife here.
That's pretty cool.
Can I ask what you're doing with the pet in the background?
I put that up just for you guys to look at.
Nice, nice.
So somebody had given that to me, another ex-Commodore employee. So it's not a special pet. It's not a prototype or anything. But I pulled that out and set that there knowing I'd be talking to you guys today. Let's see what. All right. Any other questions or?
So a lot of things were cost engineered at Commodore. Did your military training help with any of that?
Not my military. I had worked at, I had done instrumentation, so I knew how to make stuff expensive. There's a wafer. I knew how to make stuff expensively, but I knew how to right size components also. And I had to learn the Commodore way of doing things. And in the book, I do talk about how I laughed when I saw this power resistor in the +4. I realized I had taken a shortcut that I would never have dreamed of, but the shortcut worked. And it's at that moment I gave up all pretense of integrity. And I said, I'm going to learn to design in a legal corner cutting fashion that, to save money. And if I could save $1, I'd go get drunk that night. I mean, $1 was huge. It's $1 times what, 5 million or something nowadays.
Right.
So now one of the things I did was I got my hands on the current stock that we had in Japan I got it before the beginning of the 128, but I had that at my desk. And so I designed the 128 out of what was already in stock. And then I claimed that for the first year, it would cost less to make the 128 because I'm using up like 1 million of the 7407 parts we had. So if you ever look at a 128 schematic and you go, what a bunch of jelly beans. Look at all these little gates all over the place. Why'd you do that? Well, it's because they were literally free the way I accounted for them. It costs more to insert the part, which cost a penny to insert it. It costs more to insert the part than the part cost me. So it was really about just trying to cut every corner we could. And the biggest cost savings is that it's a 2-layer board. And that wasn't even, it would never have been a 4-layer. 4-layer boards would cost just $20 or more back, probably more. Just astronomical cost compared to the $1 I spent on the board.
I like all the funny stories in the book. There's a lot of funny stories.
Well, thank Margaret for, we started with the story arc, and then I told every story that I could remember that was G-rated. And we threw out a couple more of them, but it basically, she shoehorned them in there and tried to keep a smooth flowing story, but yet throw out enough stories that people could find things they might like that they hadn't heard. And basically, it's supposed to be my entire BCF presentation in a book. Yeah.
So can we expect a Commodore After Dark blog at some point?
Just hear me talk anytime. I'm not, get me talking and I'll just tell the stories as they were.
I like that you sort of explain some of the more technical things a little bit more easily for laymen, because I don't tend to be an engineer and sometimes this stuff goes over my head, but I like how you explained it a little bit, a little bit easier to people that might not be electrical engineers or things like that.
Yeah, that was something that Bill and I really worked hard on, because he knew, of course, his electronics, and I'm not an electronics person. So I approached his writings from the viewpoint of the reader. And so when I would read something and I didn't understand it, and certainly there were areas that I didn't understand, I would ask him and we'd go over and over. Sometimes we would revise things maybe 3 or 4 times. We'd come back week after week because I'd do a revision and then it was like, I'd read it again and but I don't quite get how that connects to that. So we tried very hard to make the connections between things and not have a lot of assumptions, so that so that we could appeal to a wide range of reader. So I'm glad that you found that and appreciated that.
Yeah,
that's what we were aiming for.
I tried to go over the top on some so that 1% of the readers could get the answer if they wanted, and the others could skip the section if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's too. Yeah, we wanted to reach a wide audience, and Bill knew that and knows that there were a lot of people who will read this book who really know their electronics, and so he wanted to make sure that he had stuff in there for them too. So we tried to put in a good range.
Right. Yeah. For example, just how hard the Z80 was to slip in there. People say, oh, you should just pick something else. No, here's all the facts that went behind the decision. And then here were some of the hurdles that came with it. And to have done anything that's straight off that road, we might have not made CES show, which we made with just hours to spare to begin with.
I liked how you did whatever you had to do to get things done, and in some cases, went around the managers to do what was right.
Oh, we'd like throw balloons out and stuff to distract them, leave shiny things laying around. Anything that our favorite thing was to like leave dry cleaner bags around, and you'd find like a manager in there suffocated. You'd empty it out and reset the trap. You'd have to bait it with some crayons or something. But no, we had open season on managers. They were.
I really enjoyed the story about the ROM, I think it was the basic ROM that you had to fix, that the team was working on it, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I read your book, but.
Do you mean there was one where we had to lay one ROM on top of the other? That was for that we had moved the dot on the eye.
That's it, the dot.
Yeah,
The front ROM.
And the thing broke, and that took a technical description to explain why that simple fix was funny to begin with. When I looked at it, I realized what I was doing. I'm laughing. Meanwhile, everybody thinks that they've got me by the, that I'm not along for the world since I've made this horrible mistake and it crashes. And I'm looking at it going, we moved the dot on the eye.
Oh, someone's asking, is that the koala paint bug?
It was, yes.
Yes. Okay.
So somebody asked what was the first computer, and I'd say my first personal computer was a Commodore 64. I had used a Rockwell System 65 and a Kim 1, and then an LSI 1123 at the company Pennsylvania Scale where I worked before then. But and I had taken a single board computer. This used to be Motorola based, and I jumpered it and made it into a 6502 based board. So I had made my own computer before I joined Commodore. And because I knew what was going on in this, and this is in the book, my first week there, I'm like, oh, are you splitting the bus between the video refresh? So you don't have to wait for video refresh. And the guy's like, yeah, how'd you know? And I'm like, because I'm doing that at home on my desk. And that Friday was the day that Shiraz asked me into his office and said, you're now in charge of the TED project. So the one computer I had built turned out to be useful.
Is that why you were able to whisper the opcodes in the job interview?
It absolutely. I live, breathed, innate 6502. When you look at a listing, I, as often as not, would read the opcodes as I would the actual, I forget what we called the other field, but the non-assembly field. So now I had a problem with that. I got so used to byte swapping, because we would do low byte, high byte, that when I'd go to dial the last four numbers of a phone number, I would byte swap and I'd have to hang up and dial again.
That's amazing. I love that. That's good.
Actually, that computer sparked a question in me. Is there anything to the idea that the 6502 and similar were really, really related to the Motorola chips? Like, are there significant differences?
No, they're really, really related to the Motorola chip. It really, really is. We got sued. Everybody on the 6502 came from Motorola, so it's not a mistake. The 6502 is called the 6502 just because 6501 was such a blatant ripoff of 6801 that we called it the 02. So no, it started its life at Motorola. It really did.
Interesting. One other thing I wanted to ask, Margaret, what are you working on next?
Well, actually, I've been thinking about updating my book that I brought out in 2019. I don't know if I'm going to do it as an addition to or come out with a separate book, but I've done a lot more research into using CPM, the CPM mode on the 128. That was something that I got a lot of positive feedback on. So I've been diving more into that and explaining how people can use it with the more modern data devices like the SD2 IEC and the back bit, which I've been working with quite a bit. Also, since I wrote the book, if you ever read that, I talk about how I primarily use the monochrome for the 80 column mode because I didn't have an interface or anything to use color with. But since the book came out, I've actually worked with several devices, which a lot more have become available so that the color in the 80 columns is actually achievable at an affordable price. So I think I could expand upon that too. So we'll see. I've been working on those and writing up sections. The CPM has actually expanded to over 100 pages. So that's why I've got to decide. I don't want to just have this one chapter that just balloons in the book. So I kind of have to make that decision. But thanks.
Do you talk about WordStar in there?
No, just in passing in the CPM mode.
Yeah, because that to us was the killer app for CPM was, a word processor on day one, you know?
Oh yeah, there was tons of software for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my interest in CPM is really learning the operating system. I've experimented with some of the applications and some of the games, which are very rudimentary. And also you can write basic programs in CPM, but for someone who comes to it not knowing about CPM, it's like, well, how am I going to do that? Because like the basic isn't built into CPM like it is for the 128 mode and the 64 mode. So there are things like that that I'm talking about also that I've been writing about, which will show people who really are interested in diving into what CPM can do, how they can write basic programs on it and, get set up for that.
That's pretty cool. So I'm definitely going to look forward to a possible revised edition.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'll if the person that told me he drove home for to compile his Turbo Pascal, he might be a good resource for that kind of thing too. So if you do get into it, ask me to drag up that name.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks.
So,
yeah, I want to +1 that comment on the CPM for your book, Margaret. I've got it and I enjoyed that the most. It got me playing around with CPM on my 128. I've never used it before, so that was very enjoyable. Thank you.
Good to hear.
I definitely been wanting to play around with the Z80 chip on my 128 emulator. Now I'm kind of like, oh, maybe I could get a 128 physical. Might be able to fit it in the house.
Yeah, you should.
You know what a 128's good for? Is if you have a really big door that needs to be held open,
a barn door.
A physical 128. It's hands down better than an emulator. But if you need to just run a little game or something, just get an emulator, is my advice.
No, get the real thing. Get the real thing. I mean, it's just a wonderful keyboard. And, you talk about that, Bill, in the book, where you decided about what keyboard to use for the 128. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's such a good computer to type on.
Well, I mean, to a large degree, when I was in university in the start of the 90s, I mean, I'd regularly start. Well, I think I was using my 128, but in 64 mode, and I'd hit the super snapshot button, get to my terminal, ATDT from the terminal program built into super snapshot to get into my school network, and I just log into the Unix box there and just do my work. And I loved it. It was just great to work that way.
It's nice.
Wow. Cool. Yeah, it's amazing that they even work these days, let alone that they sold for more than a year, let alone still have working ones. Somebody just mentioned they have a whole pile of 1571 drives. I have one and I'm in fear of it because one day it'll stop working, and I don't have alignment discs. I don't have anything. And so I don't even want to plug it in.
Good.
Yeah,
You can
you know-
come up and visit us and we'll set you up.
I did visit you guys.
Yes, I have a picture of that and love it. One of the two pictures, but unfortunately I lost the other one. I had a picture of me with Jim Butterfield.
Okay.
Which was unfortunately was lost in a disc crash years ago. But yeah, it kind of gave me the sensation of holy crap, I've arrived.
Cool.
You know, back in '84, I went up to the World of Commodore 2 show. Ron sent me up there to cover it, and it was such a great experience. I mean, it was
What year was
huge.
this?
Hmm?
Which year was this?
This was in '84.
Oh, okay.
It actually was, it ran from November 30th to December 2nd, 1984. And it was a great experience. I got a nice Commodore shirt, Commodore hat. Had a good time.
We did have one T-shirt. I haven't seen it in 30 years, but the T-shirt Commodore made for the 128 was light blue, and it said "Celebrate the C128." If anybody's ever seen that, but I only ever saw it once because they gave me one. And
Nice. Yeah, kind of like one, not that conference, but another conference I'd gone to with it was IBM taking a shot at Microsoft NT, and it was NT on the front, and the back it read "Nice try."
Ah, that's good.
Bad pun, my apologies.
yeah, we somebody drew a real funny mural one day at Commodore, and it was about the operating system for the Amiga. I forget what it was called. It was written by Mark Williams, and on there it just had a tag. It had a dead flower in a pot and a little tag that said "Nice try." And so you just gave me a flashback when you said that.
Oh, nice. Love that.
Hey, Bill, in your time at Commodore, were you there during any talks of the Commodore 65, the C65?
No, that was years later.
Okay.
Years later, and yeah, I've got mixed feelings on it, but I feel better about it than I did for many years after talking with some of the guys that worked on it, talking to them again about it.
Well, there's an idea. Get Margaret to write a book with Dave Haney so he can talk about the later years after you left.
We try to introduce her to Fred Bowen, and we have to see if Freddie is interested in, because Fred was there before. There's a World of Commodore book. He was there before I was there, and he was there after, and Fred knows where the bodies are buried, most definitely. Dave would have buried a few of them, but Fred would have known where they're all buried.
Oh. Cool.
Oh, cool book. How old is that book?
That's from '88 and '89.
Wow. I forget we had paper back then sometimes, you know? That's a long time ago.
You've done a number of talks about failures in, there's a bunch of YouTube videos of them, failures of older components and ICs and all kinds of things. And I loved it. So if you want to talk about that, I'd love to hear more about that.
The problem is my brain's starting to forget that stuff, but that was in reaction to several people had really approached me and said, boy, did you guys really screw up. Man, you guys, you didn't use heat sinks. How dare you? That's proof is that the CPUs are dying right and left here 35 years later. And I'm like, they were only designed to last 3 to 5 years. What, what do you mean? And so that was the genesis behind that is, room temperature is still temperature, and temperature makes things age. So just even sitting still in your garage, it's getting older. And so that was kind of where some of those talks came from. But then I was like, well, wouldn't putting it in your freezer be good? Well, I talk about what happens when the package epoxy shrinks it gouges the chip surface. So no, don't stick it in your freezer either. So yeah, there was a lot of interesting things that kind of came out from that.
Hey, a follow up to that question, because I was going to ask something fairly similar. On the TED series, there, if you're repairing a TED, like the first thing you suspect is that the CPU has died. And like almost statistically, everyone who's ever worked on one of these machines, the 8501 is the first thing you suspect that has gone wrong.
Right.
And is that a consequence of just the aging that you described? I mean, is it statistically?
No. It was a brand new. So the 6502 is NMOS, and it had been licensed out to Rockwell and Centertech. It was a very mature chip.
Okay.
Right. It had been made for 8 years, and making a chip is like baking, right? It's not just the ingredient list. You've got to do everything in exactly the right order and all the steps that go with it. So then we went to HMOS 1, which was the 7501 series. So at the same time, we were adopting a whole new set of design rules. We're using it for our first chip, the 7501. And so the 8501 is HMOS 2, is literally the first chip MOS made with the HMOS 2 process. We didn't get it all right. We're lucky it worked. I mean, we had problems with them early on where they'd eat themselves, things like that. So it absolutely was a part of our learning process where, and I felt a little guilty. I knew we were in the TED chip, same thing. We were hoping they'd last 3 years.
I think mine lasted about 2 years or so when I was a kid. My dad
We were hoping they'd last 3 years.
My dad got me a Commodore 16. I think near the tail end of the lifetime of that product as it was marketed. And I mean, he didn't know any better, right? But I'm not going to blame him. It was a great gesture as a gift. But I do remember, like, one day the machine just didn't turn on, and I, being 10 years old or 8 years old, however old I was back then, I just did not have the technical knowledge of even knowing how to even attempt to do something to restart the machine, right? So we just got a new computer. It was a Commodore 64, and it was fine. So
well, thank you. That's where I was going to go with it. Is we didn't do planned obsolescence when I was there. They did after I left. That's some of that bad management I was talking about. But if it broke after 2 years and you went and bought another Commodore computer, it didn't break our hearts, right? It was kind of that at least we got it in the door type, got our foot in the door type attitude. And I say that kind of begrudgingly, that, when you make stuff in this quantity, and we call them toys, this was a consumer product. This isn't a computer for your work mostly. It was mostly a consumer product. You give up some of your, I don't want to say integrity, there's a word I'm looking for, but I had to give up some of my high horsedness and design to the goals, which was cheap and fast. And if it acted like a more of a business thing, all the better. But if it didn't, that was the constraint. I hit my goals. I got it done, and it lasted 3 years.
You know what amazes me, Bill, is I've got 3 C128s from back then, and they all work. So it's like I've never had to replace anything on them. And I didn't really baby them. I used them quite a bit back in the 80s, and then I just kind of like put them out in various places, out on the porch, who knows where.
Hold the barn door open, things like that.
And then I just kind of like dug them out back in whenever it was, 2016 maybe. And lo and behold, they all worked.
I have about 3, and they all work, but I only have 2 power supplies, and one of those is broken.
My power supplies work, and I use a 128 almost every day.
Wow. That's still, you know how I feel about that.
I have a question for you, Bill. What's your take on FPGA replacements for the TED chips and the
Love
other
them.
chips.
They need to do more stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
So it's yeah, and you know, it used to take a designer a year of his life to pull off one of those things. And I see you have a picture of me when I was 50 pounds heavier behind you there.
Yeah, it was when I met you at World of Commodore a few years back. Yeah.
So, but now a kid can sit at home with a keyboard and write a VIC chip, you know, and it's a great time to be able to do that kind of stuff. But back then I couldn't have a lab like this. I couldn't even have an oscilloscope. If I wanted an oscilloscope, I had to go work for a hardware company that had an oscilloscope because it was more than 2 years my salary.
So we have a question here for you.
Let alone make chips.
Someone's asking, who designed the C128 power supply?
So we had that done for us by Mitsumi, I think it was, not JVC, but and it's actually in the book where we talk about the negotiations. And my boss had said, well, we need it to be 15 cents a watt. And all the Japanese gentlemen laughed at him, except one. And that guy goes, I think we misheard him. Say that again. And he said 15 cents. They thought he wanted 50 cents a watt. And suddenly they all stopped laughing. They realized they'd just been handed a Commodore goal, you know, which was to make it cheaper than anything else on the market. So we had because we had Commodore Japan, Commodore Tokyo, we had a great relationship with Japanese supply houses such as Mitsumi and Japanese Victor Company. So they're also who made our monitors, those kind of, they made the modulator that's in the 64, you know, a lot of places you look, you'll see our keyboards, you know, the custom connectors I had. I could literally order something up and get a custom part out of Japan in a month. That was a switching supply, somebody asked. Yes, it was a switching supply. It was our first switching supply in a consumer product. I don't know if other people had switching supplies, but it was risky. It was risky. But we knew we couldn't do it with a linear. The math just didn't work for getting rid of the heat and everything else in a linear supply. As the C64 supply proves, it's just that poor thing. It gets asked to do something it's just not quite up to being able to do. That's why it's potted and stuff, so it won't burst into flames on you.
Someone's asking, why was it a square plug instead of a round plug for the power?
That was a fight with Sam Trammell after Jack Trammell left. There's no good reason. The original 264 took a regular Commodore 64 power supply. I mean, why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah.
I have millions of them. They're already on the boat on their way over, and they made it a square plug. And so we changed the PC board to only support a round plug, but they changed the housing to need a square plug. And it was like the last person that touched it won, and they won when they made the housing be square plug hole. Then we had to have and they specified the housing back then. So we had to put a round one on the board to match up with the hole, with the hole in the case. The other battle we got into was Terry Ryan felt that the joystick ports should be labeled Joy 0 and Joy 1 because software said Joy parenthesis 0 or Joy parenthesis 1 for the joystick commands. Well, marketing was like, no, they need to be called 1 and 2. So I had the housing shot and it actually said Joy 0 and Joy 1, but they caught it. I did it too early and they sat around too long and too many people looked at him and said, oh, look, Herd's gone nuts here. we need to fix that one. So the trick was to be the last person to change the housing. You got to decide, you know, how the computer was. So, any other questions? So no Joy, somebody said. Well, hey, it's been great speaking with y'all. You see, visiting you guys was one of the highlights of my Commodore tour I took back when I was hitting all the places. So yeah, how long ago was that now? That was like maybe 5 years ago already.
About 5 years ago, this December, and I think I speak for everybody when I thank you both for joining us this evening. This was so much fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was nice being here. Thanks for inviting us.
I'm glad you guys were willing to join us.
Someone asked about the 1571, who designed it. That was Greg Berlin. wasn't
Greg
it?
Berlin.
Bill?
Yep.
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
Oh, Greg,
Great.
I love the
I
story
just-
about that.
Dave Haney just celebrated his 60th birthday the other day, and Greg Berlin, Dave Haney, Headley Davis, and myself all appeared in one place for one evening, and it was magical. And yeah, so I just saw Greggy.
Yeah, so someone asked which book, Back into the Storm.
Oh, so in case you don't know, Margaret and I wrote a book, and it's called Back into the Storm, and it's
Here you
about
go.
Commodore in the 1980s. There's one there, and we recommend you download an illegal PDF off the
Oh,
internet.
oh.
No.
Don't
Damn, Bill,
do
mine
that.
arrived yesterday.
No way. Not
Don't do that. Oh,
Actually-
good, you got one. Wonderful.
I actually bought the paper one and the Kindle because I can never decide whether I want to do electronic or paper or do
The
both.
Kindle has better pictures.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
actually-
you get the color pictures. Hey, that's great. Walter, you got a paperback. Good.
Actually, I bought a hard copy to put on my shelf, and I bought a Kindle version because I just find it a little easier to read off my Kindle.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can see the colors and the switch array and the layers of a chip and stuff are a lot more easier to see in the color. And the pictures of the guys look a lot better, obviously, back then.
You
But
Well, there was a question about when can they get an autographed copy. So you're going to have
I'll
to
be at
think about that.
VCF in a month. So
Good,
that's
Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. That's great. You're going to enjoy it.
Oh yeah, it was. I highly recommend it. I read the whole thing from front to back. Thank you for the nod about Vintage Computer Federation at the end of the book.
oh cool.
Awesome book. Awesome book. And that's from somebody who doesn't read a lot of books from cover to cover. And I read the whole thing. It was great.
So
Great.
excellent. Well, we appreciate the readership. We really do. It was definitely a love of the effort, and we certainly didn't do it for the money.
And you know,
Well,
this has been a lot of fun visiting with you guys at TPUG, because like you were the first group that I actually went to visit, you know, as I said, back in '84. And it was quite an
Aw.
experience. And I really appreciate you guys being around all these years later. It's wonderful.
I think I speak for everyone, and you guys are welcome back anytime.
Yes, please. Anytime you want.
Get Jeff to just he keeps in touch with me. He just rattle his cage, if nothing else, to rattle mine.
Sure, no problem.
We'll definitely do that. And let me apologize again for being all fanboy when I first reached out to you.
It's not a problem. So, all right. Well, it was wonderful speaking with y'all. I think I'm going to drop off. By all means, don't let me shorten your meeting or anything.
No,
Right.
we'll probably be here for some time longer.
Okay.
Yeah, I figured y'all would. So,
All right. Well, goodbye, everybody. Nice seeing you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to leave the recording running, but I'm going to stop the YouTube stream itself. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you